our spiritual hunger for right relation, not only in our partnerships and families, but also on our streets and throughout our social, political, economic, and religious institutions. In coming out as queer and living a queer life, aren't we also making a faith wager that the still speaking God is also rather odd, passionate about justice, no respecter of social rank or status, unmarried and promiscuously loving all creation, and graciously at work making all things new? May it be so. Thank you. I unfortunately did not have a watch, so I just went ahead and finished, and I don't know if we've taken much more time that was allotted. Can someone give me an indication of whether we can have a few minutes that we can have comments? And oh, thank you. Well, since no one's here to say yay or nay, why don't we say yay? And if you have any comments or thoughts that you'd like to share, why don't we take a few minutes? Yes.
I'd just like to ask a question. Can we get that all in writing?
Yes, I'd be glad to make that available. And I have to say, it draws on things I've written before, but you really inspired me to stretch. I think it was Rebecca, or it could have been somebody said to me, push us. And of course, I retranslated that as push myself. So I did. I pushed a little bit, and I'd be glad to share that out. Dan.
I really appreciate your drawing us back to pleasure sex, which does not fit well with Reformed theology. Reformed theology have real problems. Could you say a little more for us then, in both Reformed and larger Christian theology, about how we return to this discussion about sex and how we name the transformation that has happened in culture from procreative sex to pleasure sex?
Yeah. Well, by way of disclosure, I should say Dan and I are friends and colleagues from way back. At a time we were both Presbyterian, we served on a national task force asked to do a national study on human sexuality. And you have to know that this was the first big project of the newly reunited Presbyterian denomination that had split over slavery in the 19th century, and took 100 years for everyone to say, we're sorry, we made a mistake, let's come back. And then, wouldn't you know it, that they would say the first denominational study that they wanted to take up was sex, which for me is just validation that the Presbyterian Church has a deep institutional death wish. So Dan and I worked on this study, which was really quite remarkable, and one of the things I'm most proud about is that when the report went to our General Assembly in Baltimore in the summer of 1991, we were overwhelmingly rejected. Right. It was the report they loved to hate, and even before they read it, they voted against us because it was sex positive, feminist, and LGBTQ friendly, and framed sexuality as a justice issue where you had to deal with questions about power. And so by way of disclosure. Well, thank you, Dan, for the question, and segue, I'm going to be doing a workshop around that question of what makes good sex good. You know, if there are any people left in our pews, it's a miracle, because the stampede of young people leaving the church coincides when they're not only coming into their adulthood in terms of an adult faith, it also coincides with their sexual maturation. And the more self-respecting they are, the sooner they leave. Because we know that sexuality and spirituality are deeply intertwined. And to fail on one is to fail on the other. And people are leaving us in droves because we're not addressing the realities of where they are, which is hungry for a way to be self-respecting and at one and the same time, both sexual and spiritual. So I think if there's anyone left in the pews to talk with, ironically, I think doing sex-positive education and doing this work of sexual justice is actually one of the best evangelism tools left for the church. Amen. But we have to do this boldly and non-apologetically. We have to change the discourse. And no longer, part of the difficulty of being Christian around issues of sexuality is there has never, ever been a reliable Christian theology of sexuality. Never, ever. There is no tradition there for us to draw on. There is nothing, except little fragments here and there. What we've had is either an anti-sex theology, the best sex is no sex, or we've had a marriage theology, which is about controlling and extinguishing sex, not about encouraging its flourishing or to embrace pleasure as a gift. So I think I just stood up on another soapbox. I'll slow down just a second. It's a really good way. It's not one with a simple answer, but I think it's part of what we need to be talking with. And one of the things I think we need to insist is never, ever speak alone. That whenever we're invited, we bring our heterosexual allies on the panels with us. Because the crisis in sexuality is not a crisis in the LGBTQ community, it's a crisis in the heterosexual majority. And if truth be told, it's the crisis in male heterosexuality. And we have to name it for what it is. And we all, except for those who are still trying to hold on to their power and privilege, have good reason for things to change. Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah, you reminded me in my own experience, the question of, so the church is going through transformation right now. The question is, how do you, I don't want to say self-care, but for those who are not, in my own humble opinion, where the Spirit might be moving the church, how do you create a space where a difference becomes one of the invitation versus one to be afraid of?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question about how do we do self-care in the midst of all this, and how do we create the spaces where differences can flourish. And
right.
Yeah.
It's not the first time in history that the Spirit moves the church to a different place.
Right.
But it was always feared when the Spirit does do it.
Yeah.
So how do you get, kind of my own like 50 minutes to come right.
Yeah.
So how do you get folks not to use self-care for the others, but to bring them on?
Yeah, and isn't that all our work? And the workshops, I think, are going to be talking about that as part of this community's ongoing challenge and opportunity. I think you're quite right. I think for myself, and here I go back to Stonewall, what has allowed me to stay in the church is Stonewall and that community. And if I hadn't had a secure foot there, I would not have been able to do some of the work to challenge and push the church. So I think many of us have found the importance of being bi or multicultural, having several locations to work at. Let me just tell you one brief story, and then I'll answer another question. back in 2003, a small book that I wrote about the debates about same-sex marriage was the product of a year's sabbatical when I needed a project. They just wouldn't release me from work. So I was trying to figure out this marriage question and what my own thinking was. And so I worked that year on the book that Pilgrim Press published around marriage equality. And about 6 weeks after the book was published, I received an email from a pastor who said, I saw an ad for your book and am writing to ask you to send me a free copy. So I just was about to delete the email, but it went on, and so I read more, and the pastor said, I am the faith leader of a congregation of about 350 members, and maybe 40% or so are LGBTQ, and we just don't have much resources, so it really would be an important gift if you would send the book to me so that the congregation can have a chance to sort it out and use your resource. And he said, would you mind sending the book here to me in Sri Lanka? So I said to myself, if these issues are being worked on in Sri Lanka, where in the world are they not being worked on? And on those days when I don't see enough movement around where I reside, I think about my friends and colleagues who I've never met in Sri Lanka, and I know they are doing some of the heavy lifting when that's not possible here. And I hope we, in turn, help them out when we do and are able to do more of the heavy lifting in our locations. But the nice thing is we're not alone in this struggle. And the Spirit is moving. This is because the Spirit has stirred the waters. Do you have time for one more?
We need to actually move into our break.
We're going to move into a break, and I think you've earned it, and thank you very much.